Russia are really struggling. I mean, they're using donkeys on the front line. Their supply routes are bad. They've cancelled their Pokrovsk because they don't have the manpower. They're recruiting. Where's the media looking into that? Their economy is now on the crack, stressed. So I think we're not exploiting the fact that Putin is really on his last legs here. I mean, essentially, he's lost dominance of the Black Sea. He's lost Syria. All because of Ukraine, the state of Ukraine. He's lost 50% of Ukraine. I mean, he's not going to get that back. Yeah. That's a major. I know.
His Baltic Sea fleet is now living in a NATO lake because of the ascension of Finland.
He needs Trump. Sweden. He needs Trump to bail him out.
Hello, and welcome to episode 41 of On the Edge with Philip Ittner. Our guest is Shaun Pinner. He has been here a very long time and has deep roots in this country. He fought defending his home in the Battle of Mariupol. When that city fell, he was captured and became a prisoner of war. His harrowing tale is detailed in his book, which we discuss. He was exchanged and is now living back in Ukrainian-held territory where he's involved in the information war online. He also runs an ambulance all up and down along the front lines. So he was kind enough to come off of that battle line to join us in studio here in our Kiev location to discuss what it's like out there. It's worth noting that not 24 hours before he left and not 24 hours after he returned, the city in which he bases himself came under fire by the Russians. So this is very prescient information that he is sharing with us here today. In addition, though, because things are moving so quickly, we discuss a wide range of topics in a much more newsy atmosphere. This is a snapshot in time of this war. We talk about all sorts of different things, given that he has a unique experience and perspective from along the front line to a bigger picture here in Ukraine to indeed globally. We talk about it all. So, Shaun, thanks for coming into the studio. I appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy and you spend a lot of time out east, and we're going to talk about that. But of course, one of the things that brought you to prominence was fighting in Mariupol, your capture by Russian proxies, and your time as a POW. We've spoken to another POW previously on the show, Aidan Ainsley, who that's episode 11. He talked to us a little bit about his time in captivity. What was your experience like?
Well, we were similar places at similar time, but I didn't really see much of him. And he's got a different story, obviously. Right. I come with 13 years in the military, 9 of them in the British Army. Mm-hmm. I'd had resistance training, saw my first war really in Bosnia, so war wasn't really new to me here. I'd worked with Covert Operations Platoon doing counter-terrorism in Northern Ireland. I did 2 tours of Bosnia, and on my second tour of Bosnia, had resistance training in America, Fort Lewis, Washington State. So I'd had some conduct after capture training, resistance training. So my experience was slightly different, and I was probably the only guy that had resistance training in captivity. My home was Mariupol. I'm married to Ukrainian. I'd lived there since 2018, paid my taxes in Ukraine. So I'd learned Russian because of the geographical location. Right. First, living on the border of Russia. And so generally, I didn't have any formal education in Russian, just listened to everybody else talk, and then working with my units and picking up and speaking Rusglish in the trenches, Ukraine's Glish, and building your language up. So I'd had a different experience prior to my capture. So I'd had 2 years with National Guard in Ukraine as instructor, sniper instructor with them. And then I only sort of moved to the Marines when I needed really to cement my time in Ukraine. But at that time I was married. There wasn't many places I could go and sign a contract. And I thought about giving something to get something in return, citizenship and cement my place there. National Guard, you can't be a contract soldier with National Guard. You can be an instructor, but you can't be a contract soldier with National Guard unless you're a citizen of Ukraine at the time. So, so there was it was a new venture. So I moved to the Marines, became quickly, because of my British military training, became airborne. So I was the first foreigner to really pass all aspects of parachute training, 9 jumps, 4 combat jumps, 1 night jump. Got my wings in Ukraine, became a section commander quite quickly and a BTR commander quite quickly. And then when I learned the language and how to communicate, that really opened the doors. Became a position commander in Pavlopol the year before. And this was my 4th time on the front lines defending my home.
Well, the Ukrainians were very good about that. In that interim period between 2014 and the full-scale invasion, they rotated guys in and out of there so that everybody in the armed forces of Ukraine had heard a shot fired in anger. And so they were a little bit more, frequently, and they were more battle-tested than I think the Russians had expected.
Exactly. We had some years to prepare for the full-scale invasion, and you know yourself, every year for 5 years, it was, they're going to come. And he had 180,000 people on the border. So by the time the invasion happened, it went up to 200, 220,000, 230,000. And then you saw the Zeds on the vehicles and victory. And we knew it was going to happen 2 weeks before the full-scale invasion. We were starting to get artillery bombardments behind our position. To try and cut us off from Mariupol. The technology changed on the front line. So if you spoke to most Ukrainians, which I found extremely odd, was, we're brothers, we argue, somebody said to me. And I was, man, they've just annexed Crimea and invaded East Ukraine for the last several years. So I found it quite odd, the attitude. But we knew, my military training knew that it was going to, it was on quite a few weeks before the full-scale invasion. Even my wife wanted to buy a new kitchen for our house in Mariupol on the left bank. So and I was like, I think this is a bit different this time. So we knew it was on. But I was pretty confident, probably me and Ada, the only ones at the time saying that it's not going to be a walkover. I did a Sky interview saying, we'll give them a bloody nose. This isn't the Ukraine you think it is. And we were constantly saying that before the full-scale invasion. We'd had 3 years joint exercises with the Americans, the Canadians, the Brits. We'd been working with them, training with them. So we were pretty confident. We'd moved away from centralised command into decentralised command. So there was more emphasis on platoon sergeants running the admin, because when I got here, it was very centralised, very Soviet doctrine, and there wasn't really a regard for senior NCOs. And if you've been in the military, they're the guys that are running the show.
And they provide adaptability as well.
They do. And that moving away from decentralised command allowed us to then, when we did start getting casualties in Mariupol, to be able to slot those guys in. And they were able to take up the jobs of section commanders, platoon sergeants that were injured. So, a lot of the defence of Mariupol around 2022, the success we had was largely, I think, down to that adaptability, which the Russians didn't have, because we were overwhelmed. It was, we had a vastly superior force in numbers, and they had air dominance, but they still couldn't take Mariupol for several weeks.
Yeah, and that allowed for it, pinning them down there, allowed the rest of the country to continue to prepare for defense. And so Mariupol was essential in that battle. But, you, as you say, you were overwhelmed in Mariupol eventually, taken prisoner, went into a prisoner of war prison. What was the experience in the POW camp?
Well, my resistance trainer had told me that the actual initial capture is the most dangerous. So I'd already started to plan for, around sort of April that we were going to evacuate the position because it became untenable. 60% of our platoon was injured and killed. So I started to prepare for that, strip down, take all the intelligence off myself. And then when we did eventually get out, it took 2 goes to get out. It was dark, 3 a.m. when we left. And by the time sun came up, we'd already been ambushed. And we were split to the 4 winds and everyone was diving around everywhere trying to find everybody else. I'd lost my platoon carrying an injured guy into a building. And then I had to make the decision whether I was going to stay with that injured guy or make my way out and start my escape and evasion. I tried looking for my platoon for a couple of hours, but by that time, the daylight was there. So I knew that the initial capture was the most dangerous. So I'd had a plan that I wanted to surrender to a Russian officer and not get caught by the DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic. And unfortunately, I was captured outside, about 2 hours outside of Mariupol, trying to avoid the drones, which was like Heathrow Airport at the time, in broad daylight, which was probably the best day we'd ever had for, because we fought all over through the winter. It was extremely cold. So the sun was out, it was blue sky. So you substitute one problem with another. And then I started to work out that I could be hitting my own booby traps, our own defense, positions and mines. So it slows you up going through the buildings. But I was coming up to a sort of second tier when they fired a warning shot, and I'd literally walked 30 metres into a pretty well dug in forward observation point. There wasn't much I can do about it. And that was really my first experience of being a prisoner of war. Your whole situation changes. You're not now have to make a decision of whether or not I'm going to keep evading or surrender at that point. But I think I don't have any regrets about the decision. It started with a warning shot, and then I was taken into the position where I was then hooded and bound with masking tape, taken to a company location where when I realised I was captured by the Donetsk People's Republic, the first really sort of negative thing, I was thinking, I've been caught by the people I don't want to get caught by. I've been here long enough to know that if they're just pissed off with me, they're going to take me down a parking lot and shoot me. So my training started to come in. I speak Russian, but I speak Russian with a Cockney accent. So I'm not going to go through that filtration process. So I knew that I would be someone of interest to them. I'd be an out-of-towner. So I didn't really hide the fact that I was British. I tried to accentuate that more, hoping it will give me some sort of value. And that they wouldn't just pop me there and then. But then they just swapped me over and give me to Russian regulars because they were totally different. The militias of the DPR wear 3 different types of camouflage. They have made-up vests. They all look very different. They all got poor gear. These guys had...
They're not disciplined.
No, not at all. But these guys had fast helmets, PMags, good optics, full sets of Russian fatigues. Like good magazines, optics, good weapons, chem lights, multi-tools. I knew these were full Russian regulars, the real deal, different coloured tape, no patches. But then they took me on a 45-minute drive where I was then, before I could say anything, electrocuted with what I think was a Tapec phone. They put paddles on my fingers, tied me to the chair. And then one of those bolts is enough to get you dribbling and twitching. But I was electrocuted 3 or 4 times with no tactical questioning I was expecting. Just they were trying to find me on social media and calling me James Bond, and one person
asserting their
Condoleezza
dominance.
Rice, the Black Witch of America, which was slightly confusing.
The Black Witch of America.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, I've spoken to several guys that have been held by either DPR or Russian regulars. Immediately, one of the things that they do, according to their accounts, and maybe you can verify this, is assert their dominance. And they assert their dominance through violence and cruelty. That's really part of the point. They kind of scoff at us in the West with our niceties and our rules and all the rest of it. They consider that kind of naive and kind of namsy-pamsy. If you're going to fuck with someone, you're going to fuck with someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and they make that known very quickly. The cruelty is the part of is part of that process. What was that like for you, either firsthand or seeing other people beside you in these prison camps?
First of all, you can't train for pain. So it is shocking. I was scared. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't, but I did have an understanding of the structure of it hadn't changed for 30 years from my training. I knew I would get an initialization phase. I knew I would go from that phase into what would be someone who I'd have to lean on, who would be the guy that Mr. Nice Guy. So we'd have bad cop, good cop. Mm-hmm. I knew even if I told them the truth, I knew I was going to get electrocuted. I knew exactly what I was going into if I was captured, because I'd spent also several years out here working with people that were formerly captured. Mm-hmm. I knew I'd lived in Mariupol since 2018. I knew exactly what they were all about. So I knew it wasn't going to be the Ritz-Carlton. I'd prepared quite well for it mentally. I knew I'd had good training. I knew that I could speak a bit of Russian. But again, I wanted to keep that tool to myself. I didn't want to let them know I could speak Russian. They didn't really push me on that, to be fair. So I knew everything through the interrogation that while they were doing this, they were going to move me on. I knew they were going to, somebody else was interested in me. I knew that I could listen to the radio and get dates, times of when I was captured, how long it took me. I knew the area quite well. So having lived in Mariupol, so I was quite confident. The brain just switched from 7 weeks of fighting then to being captive, which it just naturally switched. So you can't prepare for the pain and the treatment, but the system-induced pressures generally I found quite easier than the self-induced pressures, which came later on, which we'll talk about. But the pain didn't stop. They stabbed me in the leg I got a 3-inch knife in straight into the leg, where they obviously knew I was someone that could have been trained and didn't want me running anywhere. So that's why they did that. They then took me to the nets, where for the next 60 days I was used as a propaganda mule. I'd had training in that too, so it wasn't a culture shock. I knew what to say, when to say it, not give them too much information, make them work for it. So that all just kicked in because I'd come close to death so many times in those 7 weeks that by the time we got there, I had this attitude of, if I'm going to die, if I'm going to get out of this, I need to hold my head up high and say I did a good job. And I don't think I could have lived with myself if I'd have just caved in, told them everything, been bunged onto a YouTube channel, or, they'd pictures of me singing the Russian national anthem. So I had boundaries at the start where I wasn't going to cross. And, you've got to be willing to take a few hits to get to that point where it got a bit easier once we got transferred to Makivka, Devinovnoye-Sim, 97. And out of the black site, because the black site was just for 60 days, we only had bread every now and again. And I think the actual starvation element of that is probably worse than anything, because it's with
sleep
you every
deprivation
day.
as well.
Sleep deprivation. Yeah, I described a cell in the black site. It's an isolation cell. So you're in there by yourself. There's no window. There's a light on 24/7. You can't turn it off. There's a buzzer that wakes you up, a buzzer that puts you to bed. You're in there for 7 days just stewing on your own thoughts, and then being pulled out, where I was electrocuted on the ears, pulled out for propaganda with Russia Today, not given a choice. My hood was removed, and there was Roman Kozyrev standing in front of me, who was laughing and joking with the very guys that were torturing and beating us when we went back to the prison. So, I'm a big advocate of pushing on RT now and talking about how they're an intricate part of the torture system and the FSB. So it's very difficult, and you have to take each day as it comes. But eventually, we knew that we had some value, which then you start working the small goals, the small victories, and you know that you can start pushing the envelope a bit once you realise you have some value. So starting to ask for cigarettes and food and bits and pieces to try and stay alive in those first 60 days, which was horrendous.
I can only imagine. I mean, it's we hear these reports from captivity, and they commit war crimes every day. They torture. The treatment is inhumane. Starvation, sleep deprivation. Being in any prison or any prison system is obviously, or POW system isn't going to be a piece of cake, but it's a completely different thing when it's Russian. And I want to ask you this question, and it's a bit philosophical, I suppose, but you learned your Russian here in Ukraine. Your wife is Ukrainian. Your life is in Ukraine. Ukraine is not Russia. What did you learn about the nature of Russians and for example, their relationship with power and dominance and violence and cruelty, all these instruments that I previously said they kind of scoff at us for our what they seem to be our hypocrisy and our kind of naivete, treating people with respect or, having rules. What did you learn about the nature of these things when it comes to Russian culture as opposed to Western?
Well,
including Ukrainian.
We'll start with the Russians. I mean, I'll start with some stories. My wife said when I came here, I said, you can't class a whole nation as being, I hate you, I hate the whole nation. You just can't do that. There's some good people in there. My wife said, when you spend 4 years in Ukraine, you will understand. And I did. I changed. I was taken very imperialistic. Their next stop, they kept reminding me, was Poland. They were adamant they were taking Kiev at the time. 3 years later, they haven't got 50 kilometers past their own border in some places. So, when you're in captivity, you are. I was great at compartmentalizing. So I understood that the propaganda coming through on the what we would hear on the radios, what they would tell us was their view. I knew if it was bad news for the Russians, that it was probably 10 times worse than they're actually telling me. And obviously, they're very believe their own hype, which is incredible because some of the interrogators I had to deal with were incredibly stupid. I had 45 minutes of explaining to my interrogator in one interrogation how the British media worked and how, who owned what papers and how political, because they just didn't have a clue. So it can be incredibly frustrating that, that we sit here and think the FSB, they're really good. They are good in some areas, but they are incredibly bad in other areas. So it was quite a shock for them to actually have a British guy at the time because a lot of the guys I met had never met a British guy before. So nobody really spoke English. So we had to communicate through translators, which again didn't repeat what I'd said, and I had to pull my translators at the trial, Aidan too, saying, "You're not said what I just said."
Yeah.
And that's when they realised I could speak a bit of Russian, even to the point where I had an argument with the judge, who was telling me that, "Do you see Russia in here?" I knew exactly what he was saying. He was saying that it's the Donetsk People's Republic. It's nothing to do with Russia.
Right.
Yet in the next room was a portrait of Putin hanging on the wall. I'd watched Russian air superiority bomb Mariupol. So in the trial, I was getting immensely angry at the trial by public opinion, which is now how I know how the Russian judicial system works. The capture, the RT, pumped out to the masses that we've got a Nazi mercenary terrorist, when the truth is I never actually left the country. I had legal status in. Not by any definition of mercenary. In order to be a mercenary, you need to be going to another country to do your work and topple your political government. So I certainly wasn't in it for the money, because for 5 years it was only $400 a month. I could get more for that on minimum wage job in the UK. So I could see where the narrative was going straight away. And it's to sell it to the people long before you get to your trial. When you get to the trial, got the death penalty, that was in 2 days. I never saw a lawyer all the way through my time to the trial. And then when I'm exchanged, I watch it. Other people go through the same process. I know exactly the process they're going through. We've caught another Nazi mercenary and, they're in Ukraine. No, you've taken them from Ukraine. We're not mercenaries. I live here. My wife, my family are Ukrainian. So you can see this being built, and there's nothing you can do about it. But you also understand like with the massacre, the Crocus massacre in Russia, how quick they were to get these alleged suspects. One, who had his ear cut off.
This is the shopping center incident where they instantly said it was Ukrainians.
That's right.
Yeah,
and then picked some random guys that may have not done it. I don't know. But one had his ear cut off. The other one was videoed with being electrocuted on his genitals. They are really obsessed about videoing torture. So they played me back the video of my torture. So I know there's one out there because they showed me. So
well, again, this plays into this sense of dominance and cruelty, and
absolutely
kind of like the brutality is the point. And ironically enough, those who will criticize me for saying this, they themselves will say, "You're damn right, we're cruel." It's you Westerners who pussyfoot around this kind of like the Russian system. There's no accountability. In fact, it's encouraged.
It is encouraged, yeah. I mean, you got to remember, I wasn't just in prison with Ukrainian POWs. I was in prison with civilians. I was in prison with a 19-year-old train driver from Mariupol who was pulled in, who was beaten badly and electrocuted. One of the NGOs I was with, a British guy, was hung on a hook for 12 hours. And then another one, an NGO, was waterboarded. I mean, we had like in the cell get together. What happened to you? And he told me a story. I was like, crikey, that's bad. And every time he didn't give them the answer they wanted, the water level rose. So it wasn't like a towel over the face or anything. They had this purposely made contraption, hooked you into it, and the water rose every time you didn't give the answer. A little bit more water came in. So it's systemic. It's through the whole of the Russian judicial system. So you're guilty as charged before you even get to court. So it's about minimalising that. So even when we tried to plead not guilty, we were told we couldn't do it. To stop the cameras.
Famously. Yeah.
And Aidan, there's a well-known picture on the internet with me and Aidan looking at this thing, saying, talking to the lawyer, saying, "What do you mean we can't say not guilty? You can't do that."
Well, because it's not about legal process. It's again about this sense of dominance and power. The idea of the rule of law is they're not interested. It's really about application of power.
It's about saying torture's really good. It's not how people perceive it, like in James Bond. Tell us what you know. We're gonna. It doesn't work like that. How Russia used torture is they want you to say guilty at the trial. Because then that takes the emphasis of if you die in prison, it's not going to fall back on Putin or on the stuff. So, and it's really good at getting you to admit to things you haven't done and places you haven't been. And eventually you will crack. This is
the problem with torture that we've kind of recognized in the West.
It just doesn't work.
Because they'll tell you anything at one point they'll tell you anything you want to hear.
Elvis works in my chip shop.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Like, I'm going to tell you that if you want me to say it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't quite work. But what it's exceptionally good at is getting people to say guilty for things they haven't done. And there's nothing you can do about it. And you probably life expectancy in a Russian prison, it's got to be 5 years tops.
Yeah.
If you get through that, it's a brutal place.
Yeah.
The food's bad, your hygiene's bad. There's no humanitarian aid groups coming in giving you soap or toothpaste or anything like that when I was captured. So, it's a brutal place. But we had some values. So they did identify the fact that we were a risk in general population. So they isolated a whole wing for us. Because, at the time we didn't know how bad they wanted Viktor Medvedchuk, who was the guy that was going to replace Zelensky if they'd taken Kiev. So we started to get some small victories in, but they're just imperialistic, hypocrites. Somebody said to me, Russia doesn't have the word hypocrite. So it's like
I'm not. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised. But generally, And then when you go to Ukraine, and now I work with. I'm not saying we're not guilty of any war crimes. A war crime's a war crime. It should be investigated. It should be dealt with properly. But, Ukraine is audited by the UN under the Geneva Conventions.
Yeah.
We do have humanitarian aid groups to check on the welfare of prisoners. Russia doesn't have any.
No.
That should tell you everything. So it is when you come to Ukraine, they are trying to make changes. They do. They are ethical, environmental. It's a far better place
And a completely different place. I mean, the
Completely
fact
different
that
culture.
your Ukrainian wife said to you, in 4 years, you'll understand.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
you
That's
did.
why I use that.
You learn because, and again, I'm still of the mind you can't blanket an entire culture, but people who have a different mindset than the Russian imperial mindset are the exception to the rule. They're kind of unique little unicorn snowflake, kind of like
Exactly.
Little isolated pinpoints of light in their otherwise really cruel, because they're taught this is trained behavior, this kind of relationship to cruelty and power and all the rest of it. So moving away from your time as a POW and your time fighting and going into kind of more relevant to what you're doing now, you spend a lot of time on the front lines. The Ukrainians, knowing all of this about the Russians and knowing the ramifications of falling under Moscow's dominion again, are fighting like hell.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to live this way. They don't want to have a society built on this idea of dominance and power and cruelty and violence being part and parcel of the entire system. So they're fighting like hell. Tell me, you've just come from not exactly the zero line, but you've been out there closer to the front lines than here in Kiev. I, having set up the show and being preoccupied, haven't been out there in over a year. So tell me, what's the situation out closer to the front lines?
Well, I use the phrase, I can't remember who said it, but it's not the enemy you fight in front of you, it's the love you fight for behind. It's pretty much like that. Most Ukrainians know that if Russia win and get through, then, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to disappear. Anybody connected with the government's going to disappear. Family, it's suspected you're going to disappear.
Yep.
So everybody knows that. So
you'll be rounded up. There'll be a show trial.
Gone. You won't see anybody. So everybody knows that, which is why they're fighting for their lives, because everyone knows that if they get in, that's going to happen to their families, people they know. And you've got the other bit, you're fighting on a doorstep. It's very difficult to fight an enemy, in Russia's point of view, that are fighting for their home. You're always going to get super casualties. So, again, the tactics on the front line, Western militaries don't really Ukrainians don't mind losing a bit of ground to then use it as a killing field, just to blast. So I went to Pokrovsk in November. I was one of the first, when everyone was telling me Pokrovsk was going to fall by, this year, January this year, I was saying, no, it's not. I've been down there. I've seen it with my own eyes. There's defensive lines all the way along. They're going to lose a lot of people trying to get into Pokrovsk. They pulled all the civilians out while I was there, only because they don't want people spying, because they're building the defense positions. At that point, they were 8 kilometers away. So I knew that from what I'd seen from the front lines, that it's, I don't know for your viewers, around Pokrovsk, you've got the city, but the rest of it looks like East Anglia. It's flat in the UK. It's flat, very
open
minimal
fields,
cover,
long,
fields,
slow elevation, sloping up at very, very. You mentioned East Anglia. My American audience might not know that, but my American audience will understand Pickett's Charge, which was a massacre because you're basically marching up to a defensive line on a slow elevating open field.
Exactly.
And it's mile.
And at that
after
time of the
mile
year, you can't get through it. Yeah. It's muddy, it's wet, the vehicles can't get. If you're going to attack through there, then you're going to lose a huge amount of casualties. What happened earlier this year? They've given up on it. So I said to them, they won't come up through any further forward. They're avoiding Pokrovsk because they don't want to take more casualties. Yeah. And then I get the feeling they're going to head up towards Kramatorsk and Izium and try and join up that way. They're not going to go full on. So that, I think we talked about earlier, that hype of people going, you're going to lose Pokrovsk, you're going to do this. I mean, the Western media doesn't
and
understand. And
the doom spreaders and the guys who benefit from being doom spreaders, who look at lines on a map and tell you, who've been out there, as have I, that Russia's an inevitabilith. It's a force of nature. It is, of course, it's the big, it's Goliath, David and Goliath's kind of thing. Eventually, obviously Goliath is going to win. Well, we know how that story turned out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been out on those areas. You've been out on those areas, and it is just line after line after line, and they will suffer hugely. I think you're right. They struggle to take up Kramatorsk or an Avdiivka or a Bakhmut. They may eventually inherit it. It'll all be rubble, but they may inherit it. But then they go to the next town and the next town. They struggle to take these little towns of 60 or 70,000. Kramatorsk is at least over 100,000 built, a city built for over 200,000, I would bet.
They're not going to take it.
Somewhere in that ballpark. They're not going to take it. This doom spreading of like every time they take a kilometer that, woe is the Ukrainians. It's an unwinnable war. Bullshit. This is an imminently winnable war. And as a matter of fact, I don't think the Russians have the capacity to win, quote unquote, whatever win means, this war, because they can't change the government in Kiev, and they're not going to take Odessa, so they're not going to regain the Black Sea Fleet, dominance over the Black Sea. I don't know. You work in the information warfare sphere now as well. How can we convince Western audiences that not only is this not an unwinnable war, but this is Ukraine has this well in hand if they are supported properly?
Well, that's a very big thing to unpack there. Look at tenant media, for instance, how much money the Russians are paying. I think we're in a day and age with the internet that the accessibility, even a garbage man in St. Petersburg has a voice now. One of the biggest problems we have in Ukraine is that the dregs of humanity, the drug addicts, the alcoholics, the gangsters, will do anything for cash. The social media and the internet has just made that accessible for people like the FSB to exploit that. So someone wanting the next fix will go and torch a Ukrainian vehicle for a little bit of cash, bump somebody off for a couple of $1,000s. That's the accessibility where we are with the information war now and social media. The accessibility of being able to recruit people. And I dare say the Ukrainians are doing it too. But unfortunately, that extends out to the media outlets as well. So you've got people like Tenant Media working with RT, for God's sake. Yeah. And being paid to pump Russian propaganda out.
The fact that Trump's newest administration contains all these people in his inner security cabinet.
Yesterday,
Tulsi Gabbard, who openly says that in the past that was her main source of information for her was RT. And those of us who study RT and information warfare are like, you're basically mainlining information warfare, not propaganda warfare.
Exactly. It's deeply concerning. I mean, it's really bad. And then you've got what the news is not published. So people are paid to not publish news. Editors, for instance. Where are all the advances? Where's all the positive Ukrainian advances? Where's all the, we've sunk over 30% of the Black Sea Fleet. Russia don't have dominance of the Black Sea anymore. We've taken back over 50% of the country that they initially captured in 2020. Where do you see any of that? It's just nowhere.
They have general staff guys, officers, either dying, behind the lines because Ukraine is out there taking, some covert action. Exactly. Or they're getting killed in, I think in their front line position.
There's probably Ukrainian Ladies, a great podcast, who are now looking at the partisan and resistance that's going on and highlighting that on their podcast for The Telegraph. Really good podcast to listen to, because now they're going through all those resistance activities that are happening in the occupied territories. We don't get the same problem in Ukraine as Russia's getting in the occupied territories. That should tell you everything. I mean, Russian troops can't go to Berdyansk anymore. They can't go to Mariupol because everybody in Ukraine has family probably on the other side too. And there's no iron curtain. We know exactly that some of the areas are hitting 140% inflation. We know that Putin's trying to get the death penalty because he's having problems in the occupied territories. He's now signed a decree in the last week to say that for all those Ukrainians he didn't slaughter, he's now forcibly deporting them. I mean, it's ethnic cleansing on a global scale.
If you don't accept a Russian passport, you don't get medical
Exactly.
You
Water,
don't
basic
get
human rights.
Basic
medical.
human rights. There are stories of women in giving birth that if they don't have a Russian passport, their children are taken from them. Their newborn children are taken from them. We have a number of reports of this kind of stuff. So they force you to take a Russian passport. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It's ethnic cleansing.
And the Russian speaking is just really gets my goat. I am a Russian speaker from East Ukraine who was just born in London. They didn't come in to save Russian speakers because they slaughtered over 25,000, and that's a moderate figure in Mariupol, women and children included, predominantly Ukrainian and Russian speakers. Mm-hmm. So that's a fake. Russia isn't banned in Ukraine. I come from here. I learned Russian. I speak Russian almost every other day. It's not banned here. The churches is another one. It's all propaganda, Russian propaganda that's going out into the mainstream media. Which on the reverse, Ukraine doesn't even get a foot in the door with any of the positives that it does in Ukraine. So that's where me and you come in. That's where I go to the front lines. I'm not a journalist, but now I'm writing for a national newspaper in the UK. Yeah. Because they have struggled to keep the finance to get somebody out there full time. So when they ring me and say, Shaun, could you come on this? I'm like, yep. Write something.
And it shouldn't be that way.
It shouldn't be that way.
It shouldn't be that way. There should be support. Well supported, well provided for, paid, equipped, professional journalists out here. The press corps has all but abandoned this place for a variety of reasons, but also part of it is because of the complexity of the story. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm not an expert, as we said before, but I have more of an understanding of what's happening in Ukraine and the ground.
Well, you have a Ukrainian wife. You live in Ukraine.
I am pro-Ukrainian. And I try and keep it neutral.
I've been coming here 25 years. I speak Russian. I've lived here for the last 3 years, and I still feel like I'm only scratching the surface, Yeah. And that leads me to more discussion about this kind of information warfare, is that there are these guys who are out there doing the doom spreading, or who are in way over their head. Yeah. And don't understand the complexity that there's very few news organizations have a reporter posted here learning the intricacies and the stories and the complexities and the three-dimensional aspect of this country. And they just don't do it. And it drives me nuts. So how do we do this, Shaun?
I don't know. Keep doing what we're doing. Keep reposting the tweets. Speak to people on the ground at source. Get your information from them, not your likes of Jackson Hinkle and people like that who just spout crap from the other side of the planet, thinking they know everything about Ukraine.
With their children, really, and they're being manipulated and used by Moscow.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a massive manipulation campaign, as which my following, really, because I was in the military, I didn't get on social media. I wasn't on any platforms. I tried to stay off the radar. But what's different now is I've learned and picking up is in the 2 or 3 years I've been exchanged, my following went from 0 to 40,000 people on X, to 25,000 people on Blue Sky, all within that small time frame, because I'm reporting on the ground and talking to people. Not necessarily, I'm not paid for it, but I live here. I'm able to talk. I did a podcast on Monday where I was talking about how, yes, like yesterday in Dnipro just got attacked very badly. That's been going on every day. It's just a bad day for Dnipro yesterday. We've had ballistic missiles for 2 years. We've had drones every other. It's now every day. So what I try and talk to people about is that when you come to somewhere like Dnipro, they only assume it's like the Bali bombing. When you talk about the Bali bomb, you go to Bali, where the bomb went off. One bomb, like over 10 years ago. But people remember the Bali bombing.
I don't. The Bali bombing.
The Bali bombing, yeah. The club got bombed, and
okay.
Yeah. So people remember sort of Bali for the wrong reasons, but when we go to Dnipro, you go through quite a lot of the day, most days, where you wouldn't even think there's a war on. But what happened? What Putin's really good at doing is homing in and sending 24 drones over of a night time, having a few explosions, and then having his media teams promote that, look at what we're doing to Dnipro. Yes, it is bad, but that's concentrating. The city of Dnipro is huge. Most of that's not even touched, but it is that small area that gets the hype where we sit there and say, hold on a minute, yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, we've lost a couple of people, civilians, infrastructure. But generally, it's not reflective of the whole country.
Yeah.
Most of the country doesn't get bombed. You can go further, you go west. It just doesn't, it's not like that.
Well, we
Business
have
and life
very
goes
good air
on.
defenses here in the capital, as we should.
As you should,
As
yeah.
we should. This should be one of the most protected cities in Ukraine, and it is.
Yeah.
But even we still get, middle of the night anti-aircraft stuff, which is, going up into the air. You see explosions midair. You get debris coming down. No place is safe in Ukraine. But you're right. It's worse out east. And so I want to talk to you about being out east, because you talk about it's not really that Putin would like us to think it's worse than it is. What I've heard are two things. I've heard from people out east who are, of course, resentful of the West not being more supportive and providing air cover for them, but they hate the Russians. Yeah. Every time they get bombed, every time that something goes boom,
that hate goes up.
It's a completely opposite.
Same in the Blitz.
of what the intent is, and I don't think Moscow understands that. So I hear the resilience of the Ukrainian people, but more than that, I also have, when you get Ukrainian soldiers who kind of rotate back, you will hear from them that they're the ones that want the war to go on to a just
end. Yeah, I say that all the time.
More so even than some people who are in relatively safer places, because they just want the damn war to end, which is also completely understandable.
Yeah.
But when you lose guys, when you're under constant attack like you are out east, it seems to me it even steals their resolve. What do you think about this difference between guys who are in relative safety and the guys who are out there in frontline cities like Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Kherson?
I pick up casualties now they're not at the stabilization points, but they're critically injured normally, and we move them to the specialist units, part of my charity, POW, or not my charity, but the charity I work for, POW. But Chris Garrett is a founder, and his partner's a founder at that, and they worked over here since 2014, Chris has, and paramedics, and he's an EOD guy. So we move a lot of casualties to help support the local logistics and the ambulance crews, so they're not, with our ambulances, so we can get them out. And we take every civilians, soldiers, even Russian POW one person took. So we take them all. And a lot of the guys that are coming off the front lines are generally, I was surprised on my first day and my first week on the job, how chipper they were. And there was guys with bandages on their eyes, and that you could crack jokes. And one guy had bandages on his eyes, he couldn't see, but spoke a little bit of English. And I said, he said, "Do you have a cigarette?" And I said, "Haven't you had enough smoke?" And he just started to joke. He said, "Don't make me smile." And he couldn't see. And I talk to them, and they talk about their injuries, and they're like, "Yeah, we're giving them some shit in Tourette's, or we're taking." I mean, totally the opposite you would expect. I mean, they're generally quite chipper because they're coming off the line anyway. But these are some really serious casualties. Missing limbs and can't see. But generally, they're still. I'm absolutely surprised at the attitude of them when they come back off the lines. They're like, "What's going on? What's happening?" They want to know information. And then I talk to them. Are you okay talking about, what's happening? I don't want them to relive their time, but generally they're quite chipper. A lot of them. They're like, yeah, we're giving America. We're pushing good. We're pushing there. We're pushing there. So I'm absolutely surprised at the resolve of the guys on the front line to keep going. They're tired. People want peace. Ukraine wants peace.
Oh, yeah.
But like you said, they don't want it with the rug pulled from underneath them. I mean, what the Trump administration have done, meeting Zelensky's opposition, was that set more anger and more ripples than anything. Because clearly you don't understand Ukraine. Clearly that give Zelensky even more support. So, it's really apparent that the Trump administration with the people they've sent, don't know the region, can't speak the language. Witkoff is, I believe, a property developer, not a military expert of any sort. The guys they sent were incapable for doing the task. And now they're preaching Russian narratives, which is really got, again, Ukrainians angry. And that fires them up even more because they just think, why are they not seeing this? And I have to, part of the information war goes both ways. So I talk to the world outside of Ukraine, what's happening here on the ground. But I also have to talk to Ukrainians about, hold on a minute, there are plenty of Americans that, do support you. It's the Trump administration and then the rest of America. Because, and I have to explain that to Ukrainians, don't lose hope, because that really gets the anger and the blood boiling.
I oftentimes, what I'll say to them is, we were attacked too. You just don't, your fight is kinetic, it's on the ground, and it's far more important and far more,
for sure.
It's a matter of life or death. We were attacked in our body politic. And when I kind of explain that to them, oftentimes Ukrainians will be like, because they themselves have had a history of being attacked in their society, in their culture, in their politics, in their mindset, the information warfare. But I did want to ask you about that. How is morale out there among the troops generally? And is this apparent, I'll say it what it is, potential betrayal by the Americans affecting that morale?
It is. That's what affects the morale. I mean, Zelensky's opinion ratings have gone up. I mean, it's ridiculously, the morale is I'm still surprised how cosmetically we still hold it together a lot of the times, with people like in Dnipro, business goes on, everything's nothing. It's like some days nothing, there isn't a war. So I'm absolutely surprised. I don't think there's a person, certainly in Dnipro, that I haven't spoke to that doesn't know somebody is a POW, somebody's been killed, somebody's been injured, or somebody's fighting. I think there are two contentions on the front line. One is that some people have been doing this for a long time and want to come off the line. I think they've earned it. The mobilizations were one entity, but none of it seems to be really to do. It's still hatred for the Russians. I mean, there are some groans and grunts about mobilization. It's certainly not the individual cases where people are getting picked up and put into cars. I've never seen one in the whole time I've been here. But I do know there is a conscious, I don't know, worry that people might get picked up. But generally, the morale is still, want to fight, still want to push. They just don't understand why they're not getting the support. And even Europe, it's not just America bash here. One of the things I do agree with Trump on was that Europe should spend more money and increase its defense. We should have less reliance on the US as NATO and Europe. I've been pushing that well before Trump said it, years ago. But now it's come to a crunch point where Europe had just buried their head in the sand and just really, really not done what they said they should do. And it's taken a long time. I think we're getting there. I think Europe is starting to understand the situation now. I think the latest signal gate has really got now Europeans changing their stance completely, because I mean it's all out there, the feelings, the hatred, it's there. I think there's no way that
and the lack of, how can you trust an ally if they're going to leak like a sieve like that?
That's just for any veteran. We're brought up with
if you were one of those
as being the buzzword.
If you were one of those F-18 pilots, how would you be feeling?
I'd be fuming right now.
I'd
be fuming. So
let me just round this up, Shaun, and thanks again for coming in and talking to us. But I wanted to talk to you about your time in as POW. I wanted to talk about what it's like to be out there fighting the Russians, and all these other topics we've discussed. But I really wanted, as somebody who's been out there on the front lines, or along the front line, I contend, having been out there myself, that Russia does not have the capacity to take any large settlement, including Kramatorsk. It will cost them hundreds of thousands of men to take, a Kramatorsk, or God forbid, an Odessa or a Kharkiv, and certainly not Kiev. They would lose hundreds and hundreds of thousands of more men. What is your impression of what Russia can achieve? And what is your impression of what Ukraine can defend?
Oh, let's start with Ukraine because that's easier. I think if people just did what they said they were going to do, we wouldn't be in this position now. You know, if we were going to get the weapons, we didn't go through that year-long drought where we had we've been through that. So even if they stop the military aid, it's going to be another year before any of that takes shape anyway, or starts to have an effect in Ukraine. So I still believe that Ukraine is a better military on the whole. I mean, it's gone in first country to invade a nuclear power. I mean, it's in Belgrade now. You know, the only people that's holding Ukraine from winning this war is Europe and the States. I mean, that's a given. Russia are really struggling. I mean, they're using donkeys on the front line. Their supply routes are bad. They've cancelled their Pokrovsk because they don't have the manpower. They're recruiting. Where's the media looking into that? Their economy is now on the crack, stressed. So I think we're not exploiting the fact that Putin is really on his last legs here. I mean, essentially, he's lost dominance of the Black Sea. He's lost Syria. I mean, all because of Ukraine, the state of Ukraine. He's lost 50% of Ukraine. I mean, he's not going to get that back. Yeah. That's a major. I know.
His Baltic Sea fleet is now living in a NATO lake because of the ascension of Finland.
He needs Trump. Sweden. He needs Trump to bail him out. So, you know, I wrote the other day on my social media feed that whatever you think now with these peace talks, what you've got is that loss of dominance of the Black Sea is such a major victory for Ukraine because, one, they didn't even have a conventional navy. So it's changed naval warfare forever. So that in it, just that one bit is such a major victory for Ukraine. They shouldn't let that go. So, you know, all these free trade routes, I'm a bit skeptical about that. But don't take it away from a military victory. That's a military victory. Kherson, military victory. I mean, the reason they don't mobilise everybody from 18 to 60 is because of the lack of weapons they've had, the drips and drabs. And Zelensky doesn't want to do that. If they had just committed, he would have probably mobilised everyone from 18 to 60. We could have won this war a year and a half, 2 years ago. And still, Russia doesn't hold any majority. Sorry, let me rephrase that.
Well, they've got Mariupol. They took Mariupol, but that's about it.
But in 3 years, fourth year of fighting, doesn't control one full oblast. Mm-hmm. Is he going to be happy with that? No. He's now wanting Ukraine to cede territory that they don't actually control. And he's banking on Trump to do that. That is, Ukraine's already won this war. It's lost, 18% of the country. But I think if they got the support from Europe and America, I think they could quite easily take that, but not easily, but, you know, they could take that back over time, inch by inch. I mean, you've still got the partisans and the resistance that's working in those areas too. Everyone wants to back a winner. And if Ukraine had suddenly broke through and had some success, then they could be able to push them out. I have no doubt after seeing the Ukrainian military. No doubt whatsoever.
No doubt in my mind either. And I'm looking forward to getting out east to take a assessment with my own two eyes at some point. But for right now, this is our response. This is our priority, is this show. Because I, along with you, think that the information warfare landscape is essential.
It is essential.
To
it's another front.
Success. It's another tangible front in this war that has real cost analysis in terms of loss of life. So you have your book out, Live, Fight, Survive. Everybody can go and get a copy of that. Tell folks where they can follow you to get more, daily information.
I'm on X. I'm on Instagram. You'll find me, Shaun Pinner, on there. Snowy UA 100.
We'll include the links below.
And then I'm pretty much on Blue Sky as well. Same. You'll find me on there, Shaun Pinner. But I do talks and public speaking now, and hopefully a trip to Canada very shortly. I'm still waiting for my visa from America.
Before we close out completely, let's just one last quick question on that topic is, do you think NATO forces, whether it's on one side of the Atlantic or another, are finally coming to the realization that this war is their fight, that they have to prepare for, they have to step up? Basically.
I work with the military, including the American military, and talk about my time in captivity, and then that escalated on to operating on the ground in Ukraine, their focus is still on Ukraine from what I heard. What's changed is inevitably a lot of the Ukrainians were coming back from operations like Interflex, where they go away and be trained by foreign forces, and then they come back to Ukraine, and that wasn't too good. The feedback from that wasn't very good. The Ukrainians will come back and say they don't understand the situation here. Fast forward 2 or 3 years, now you've got JSOC in Poland, you've got Ukrainian instructors talking about Ukraine's going to be training the world after this, not just in drone warfare and the innovations they made here and fighting the Russians on the Black Sea, but their instructor's going to be teaching NATO troops how to fight in trenches. Because one of the things I learned when I came here was I came with all these NATO standards and, my training with the British Army, but they taught me how to fight in trenches. They taught me to live off the land. They taught me how to fillet fish, find rack in the rivers and chop wood and build defence positions. My defence training in the British Army was probably 2-3 weeks long. And that's something I learned from them, which I now go to talk to the militaries in Europe and say, hold on a minute, you need to listen to these boys because they're fighting this war every day. Mm-hmm. Look at the drone and the drone wars. So I'm able to be that link between Ukrainians on the front lines and how they're fighting, listen and watch what they do, and then go back and talk to the militaries about, listen, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? Fiber optics, how they use fiber optics. The newest one was the gas attacks recently around New York by Russia on Ukrainian troops around New York and Kupiansk. It seems to me the Russians are using drones more when they're short of artillery, and now they're bringing in 40mm capsules full of, riot control agent, a more concentrated, dense riot control agent to pop into trenches and pop through slips and gas Ukrainians out. So, we've had a number of casualties with inhalation problems. Some I could see are definitely chloropicrin or some sort of riot control agent. Some are unknown. But that's how bad it is on the front. And I'm able to go back and talk to Western militaries about that, about how they're using that.
Well, the Western trainers and officer corps should be listening, in my opinion, to the ZSU, to the Armed Forces of Ukraine, because they've been extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you would agree with me there. And then also the people of this country. I'm constantly humbled by what they're doing and the resilience here. So I'm privileged to be here. It's been humbling, and I'm proud to stand beside these people. I suspect honestly, you feel the same way, especially with your family ties here. Thanks for coming and sitting down with us. We'll include all the links and everything so that folks can follow you and learn more from you. But if there's anything else you'd like to add.
No, I think we've covered it all. I could talk with you all day about this.
Of course, we could talk for hours, but to try and keep it to a reasonable runtime, we'll close it down. Shaun Pinner, thanks very much for coming and talking to us. I have no doubt in the strength and resilience of the Ukrainian people. I think you would share that opinion with me. So
Slava Ukraine.
Everybody out there, Geroyam Slava, keep supporting Ukraine, support voices like Shaun's, support this channel on the Edge, and let's get the word out there. Ukraine can win this war if we only just support it. Thanks again, Shaun.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Cheers.